Hello there, fellow traveller. Tonight, let's set aside the fantasy of chivalry, romance, and shining armour, and talk about what life was actually like for a medieval knight. Because despite the stories, being a knight wasn't glorious. It was cold, brutal, uncomfortable, and often downright miserable. So as the rain taps gently on the windows, and your blanket keeps you safe from the draft, let me walk you through 25 reasons why it seriously sucked being a knight. We'll start with the worst and slowly work our way down until you're too sleepy to be bothered by any of it. Let's begin. Let's start with reason 1. Your armour could weigh over 60 pounds. Before even swinging a sword, you had to carry the equivalent of a grown toddler on your body. A full suit of plate armour could weigh anywhere from 45 to 70 pounds, depending on your status and what you could afford. That meant every step was heavy, every climb agonising, and if you fell in the mud or were knocked down in battle, good luck getting up without help. Some knights even drowned in rivers because their armour dragged them straight to the bottom. Heroic? Maybe. Exhausting? Always. 2. Fighting in summer heat meant risking heat stroke. Metal absorbs heat, a fact every knight knew painfully well. On hot summer days, battlefields felt like ovens. The sun beat down, turning your helmet into a personal furnace. You couldn't remove it without risking a stray arrow or sword. Inside that steel shell, sweat poured down your face, soaked your gambeson, and made it hard to breathe. Heat exhaustion set in fast, and heat stroke wasn't uncommon. Some knights collapsed before the first blow was struck. 3. The code of chivalry sounded noble, but reality wasn't. You were taught to follow a strict moral code. Protect the innocent, defend your lord, never lie, be brave, be kind. In practice, this was almost impossible. Most knights were still political pawns, raiding peasants, betraying allies, and ignoring oaths when it suited them. Upholding chivalry in a world that rarely rewarded it made you seem weak, and often ended with your head on a pike. The world didn't care for ideals. It cared for power. 4. Losing your horse was basically a death sentence. Knights were cavalry. Your horse was your advantage. Mobility, strength, momentum. Without it, you were just a slow, top-heavy target stuck in the mud. If your horse was killed in battle, you had to dismount into chaos, fight through lines of enemies, and try to survive on foot, all while dragging 60 pounds of armour. Worse, some enemies aimed for your horse on purpose just to finish you off easier once you hit the dirt. 5. Lances shattered on impact, and those splinters were deadly. During jousts or battlefield charges, knights used lances that were designed to break. That sounds exciting until you realise what that meant. Wood splinters flying at high speed, sometimes piercing arms, legs, or even eyes. In some cases, fragments stabbed through the gap in a helmet visor and drove deep into the skull. Even if you won the clash, you might still leave with internal bleeding, a concussion, or a shattered rib cage. 6. If you were captured, you had to hope someone paid your ransom. Knights were valuable, but only if your family or liege had the coin to bring you home. Otherwise, you might spend years in a dungeon, forgotten. The better your armour and horse, the higher your ransom, which meant you could become a bargaining chip in a game you had no say in. If no one paid, you were sometimes executed, or worse, left to rot in chains, far from home, nameless and alone. 7. Jousting looked romantic, but it routinely shattered bones. It was a tournament favourite, 2 armoured men charging at each other with lances for sport and honour. But underneath the pageantry was real pain. even with blunt tips, lances struck with enough force to knock a man clean off his horse. Broken collarbones, fractured skulls, and ruptured organs were common. A misjudged angle or a horse misstep could end in paralysis or death, all in front of a cheering crowd. 8. Armour rusted fast, and you had to clean it constantly. Steel armour was high maintenance. If you didn't regularly oil it, dry it, and polish it, it would rust, and rust weakened everything. Even a small speck could spread across the suit. You needed a squire just to keep it from falling apart. And if you didn't have one, you spent hours after battle scraping mud and moisture off with cloth and sand. Armour didn't just protect you, it demanded your full-time attention. 9. You couldn't dress yourself. The process of getting into armour wasn't fast or simple. It could take 15 to 30 minutes with 2 trained squires. They had to strap buckles, secure chainmail, and fasten joints. You couldn't just suit up alone, and if you needed to get dressed in a hurry, like for a sudden raid or night ambush, you were lucky to get your boots on before the enemy arrived. 10. Using the bathroom in armour was a nightmare. Let's be honest, there was no good way to relieve yourself during battle. Armour didn't allow for quick access. Some knights wet themselves during fights because there was simply no time or privacy. On long marches, you'd have to ask your squire to help undress you behind a bush, and on bad days, accidents happened mid-battle, which only added to the smells of sweat, blood, and unwashed bodies already lingering in your suit. 11th. Fainting or collapsing meant suffocating inside your helmet. Helmets were tight, heavy, and hard to remove. If you passed out from blood loss, heat, or exhaustion, you couldn't just pull it off and breathe. Sometimes your squire couldn't get to you in time. There are accounts of knights who suffocated inside their own armour simply because they fell unconscious and no one could help fast enough. Your head was encased in a steel box, and that box didn't forgive weakness. 12th. You had to balance prayer and slaughter. Knights were expected to be devout Christians, attending Mass, confessing, praying, and carrying holy relics into battle. But they were also expected to kill without mercy. It created a strange double life. Kill the heretic, then kneel and ask for forgiveness. Some knights developed deep guilt, others just compartmentalized. Either way, the tension between soul and sword never really went away. 13. Training began at age 7 and never really ended. Your journey started as a page, doing chores and learning manners. Then you became a squire, practicing swordplay, horseback riding, and etiquette. Only after years of service could you be knighted. But even then, training continued. Sword drills, jousting practice, hunting, tactics. Your whole life was consumed by preparation for wars you might never understand. 14. You had to pay for everything yourself. Knights weren't given armour for free. You had to buy or inherit it, and that included your sword, chainmail, plate, shield, lance, saddle, and warhorse. A single warhorse cost as much as a small house. If your equipment was damaged or stolen in battle, replacing it could take years. Being a knight meant being part soldier, part investor. 15. A single arrow could end you. No matter how advanced your armour was, there were always weak points. Under the arm, the neck, behind the knee, or the eye slit. Skilled archers could aim for those gaps, and even if you were one of the best armoured men on the battlefield, one lucky shot could slide right into your brain before you even saw who fired it. 16th. Maces ignored all your armour. Chainmail and plate could stop swords and arrows, but not blunt force. That's why enemies carried maces and warhammers, weapons designed to bypass armour by smashing bones underneath. A hit to the helmet might not pierce the steel, but it could still knock you out or cause fatal brain damage. Sometimes you didn't even bleed. You just fell over and never got up again. 17. You were expected to fast before holy battles. On crusades and righteous wars, it wasn't uncommon for knights to fast as a sign of purity. That meant little food and even less water, right before marching into a life or death struggle. Your stomach was empty, your body was weak, and yet you were still expected to carry 60 pounds of steel, charge into enemy lines, and swing your sword until the trumpet sounded. 18. Infection was often more lethal than battle. You might survive a brutal clash only to die a week later from a minor wound. No one knew about germs. Wounds were rarely cleaned properly. Tools were reused. Bandages were old rags. And if the wound turned black or started to smell, your best hope was amputation, which usually meant death anyway. Some knights feared doctors more than swords. 19. The Crusades meant leaving home for years, or forever. Answering the Pope's call to arms might mean travelling across mountains and deserts to fight people you'd never met. Most knights never made it back. Disease, starvation, and shipwrecks claimed more lives than enemy blades. And if you did return, it was often to a family that barely remembered you, or to find your land seized and your name forgotten. 20. Victory meant doing horrible things. After winning a battle, you didn't go home. You looted villages, burned homes, and sometimes executed prisoners. Mercy wasn't expected. In fact, showing it could make your lord question your loyalty. The stories might paint you as a hero, but many knights carried the weight of what they did, long after the glory faded. 21. You had to follow orders, no matter how stupid. Knights didn't get to choose their battles. If your lord said charge, you charged, even if the enemy outnumbered you 10 to 1, even if it meant burning a village you'd sworn to protect. Loyalty wasn't optional. Questioning orders could get you stripped of your title, imprisoned, or executed for treason. 22nd. Slippery terrain was more dangerous than battle. Armour was built for flat open ground, but battles didn't always happen there. Mud, hills, and cobblestones were death traps. One slip, and you could tumble down a slope, dislocate a joint, or fall onto your own sword. Some knights drowned in shallow streams after falling in with armour too heavy to swim in. 23rd. A peasant with a spear could kill you. You spent decades training. You had a custom forged blade. You wore armour worth more than most homes, and yet one lucky stab from a farmer's spear or a well-thrown rock could be the end. In the chaos of battle, all that preparation meant little. Death didn't care about your rank. 24. Sleep was rare, cold, and uncomfortable. After battle, or during long campaigns, sleep came in a tent, if you were lucky. Most of the time, it was on damp ground, in cold air, surrounded by grumbling men and the stench of blood, sweat, and campfires. If it rained, your bedding got soaked. If it froze, your toes went numb. And snoring squires were the lullaby. 25. Your warhorse was everything, and losing it broke you. A knight without a horse was like a bird without wings. These massive beasts were trained for battle, and each had their own armour. If your horse was killed, not only were you thrown from your mount, but you also lost your speed, your momentum, and most of your status. Knights on foot were often mistaken for common infantry, and treated like it. And that, fellow traveller, was just a taste of what made being a knight, well, rather miserable. As the fire dies down and your eyelids grow heavy, remember, the stories may shine, but the truth was rusty, sore, and sorely overrated. Sleep well, and I'll see you next time for even more very boring facts to sleep.